Taylor Walker from the Adelaide Crows, and you're listening to the Coaches Panel.
Shannon Hurn from the West Coast Eagles.
This is Nathan Jones from the Melbourne Football Club.
Phil Davis from the GWS Giants.
It's Brad Avery from the Port Adelaide Football Club.
And you're listening to the Coaches Panel.
Hello, you got MJ. Hope you've been enjoying the 50 most relevant. And before we get to the number one player, and chances are you've figured out who it is before they are officially revealed tomorrow, unless I do completely lose my marbles, which I wouldn't discount that, by the way. Before we get to the number one player, I wanted to take a few minutes and chat about 10 players that here at the Coaches Panel we thought were really unlucky to miss that 50 most relevant list. To help me do the countdown of just 10 of the players, we could do even more, but we've just picked a group of 10. I got Rids on. Hello, mate. How are you?
Hey, buddy. How you going?
I'm good. Like we said, tomorrow we reveal that number one player. And again, no massive surprises. We won't say the name just yet. But look, no massive surprises who it is. But right over these kind of past 49 days, it's all been about starting the fantasy football conversation in the preseason and starting to define what makes a player relevant. Because as you have spoken about throughout countless years, many members of the Coaches Panel throughout this series as well, talking about players' relevance isn't just about their ability to score well. It's looking at cash cows. It's looking at these breakout candidates. And right throughout the 50 most relevant, these are the sort of players we've looked at.
And not just that, it's also looking at guys, okay, who might have ownership, big, high ownership numbers, and might not perform well.
Yeah.
So, I mean, at the end of the day, they're relevant in the other way. So look at Jack Billings last year.
Yeah.
He's a perfect example. He didn't perform well. People who didn't start him actually got a nice little jump.
Yep, no, exactly right. And at the end of the day, the 50 most relevant, it's a very subjective list. It's just I think these are the most relevant in some kind of chronological order. And whether you choose to agree or disagree, that's actually okay. The preseason is actually not about being right or wrong. The preseason is about having conversations, challenging each other in a healthy way, figuring things out to get to the ultimate ideal structure, setup, and the premiums, the breakouts, the cash cows that you believe are going to help you the most. And that's what the preseason is all about.
Yeah, it's all about discussion. No one's right, no one's wrong. There's no season. Everyone's on equal first right now.
No, that's very, very true. But let's talk about 10 guys that really, as we started to create the list, as I started to filter down who I thought were the 50 most relevant players, it started to become apparent that guys that were still very, very relevant were not going to fit into this top 50. And so we've just picked a group of 10 of them that I wanted to highlight. We could have done another 50 that could fit in the 50, but we just don't have the time to do that. So we've picked 10. Let's kick it off with Melbourne co-captain Jack Viney. He's already had some really strong, substantial seasonal averages back in 2016 in AFL Fantasy and Dream Team. He has averaged 100 before. Numerous seasons in Supercoach where he's averaged over the 90 marker. And that's exactly where he found himself after last year. 7 games, an average of around about 91, 92, depending on the salary cap format you choose to play. Because of such a small games played, he does have a discount. But as we saw in the finals, mate, especially in those really hotly contested games of the semi and the elimination final, gosh, this guy can crack in and score well.
So, I mean, it's obvious, though. Like, I mean, the breakout, the what would you call it, the mid-prices. So we've got the Crouch in there. We've got, like, Miles in there. We've got Hanbury. We had Libba. So, I mean, someone's going to have to miss out. So this guy's probably the next one in line. I mean, if you're not looking at a North Melbourne guy. So, I mean, at the end of the day, yeah, I mean, I can make a case for him. I can make a case against him, really. He's got a good buy round.
Yep.
He looks fit. He hasn't missed a beat, apparently, this pre-season. So, I mean, 450-odd thousand in Supercoach. And what is he in Dream Team? He's not much different in Dream Team.
No, he's very comparable, yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, yeah, you can understand why people would be looking at him.
Yeah.
He's gone over 100 in Dream Team before, gone, as you said, over 90, 97, I think it was a couple of years ago in Supercoach.
Yeah, 96.4, yeah.
Yeah, durability probably question mark. Because, I mean, when people coming back from that injury, like, it does take a bit of time. But, I mean, he's always going to tackle. He's always going to be playing as a midfielder. There's no more role issues with him at the moment because of harms. So, yeah, look, I mean, I can understand why he would be relevant to you. but I can also understand why he doesn't make the top 50.
Yeah, exactly right. And there are so many of these sort of guys that we just can't pick all of them in that category. And so you're right. That's why one of the reasons he slid out. Would you consider him in any specific format? If there was one you were really going to lock him in, that would be the one format that you'd really chase after him?
Well, I think he's a little bit priced out of it in Dream Team, to be honest, at that price. So, I mean, if you're looking at that price tag, it's nearly 200,000 more than Miles.
Yeah.
So it does make it a little bit awkward. I'm just trying to find AFL. Sorry, I'm just
604,000 in AFL fantasy.
Yeah, again, he's a little bit pricey, isn't he? So I'd probably go him in Supercoach, but it'd be a direct. So the way that I often do with starting teams, is I look at guys, around that same price tag. So I'd be looking at Brad Crouch potentially versus what was he, Jack Viney?
Yep.
So Viney's got a better buy.
Yes.
Probably has a little bit slightly better history in the last 5 years, but I mean that's probably give or take. Crouch is probably more talented. So I mean it's toss of the coin, really, isn't it?
Yeah, it really does become down to that perspective. I think Jack Viney, an incredible option. Maybe priced out of it a little bit in some formats, but in terms of his kind of ability to score well, the likelihood of him either being tagged or being used as the tagger is really, really low now that Harms has come in and played that role. We saw him as a tagger at varying points in his early development. That's not going to happen now. He's going to be allowed to hunt the ball and hunt the man, but not have to play accountable football as his primary focus. So, again, very relevant. Just couldn't quite squeeze him into the top 50.
And I should mention as well, because it's one of my pet hates, the buy round isn't really relevant unless you're looking at two guys that you think are going to score roughly the same, and you've got to choose one of them.
Yeah, exactly right. Sometimes you need to certainly factor in the buys, but they should not determine your ability to pick a player that you believe is going to be one of the best options.
Correct.
Let's talk about another player that's just missed out. And again, it's probably on the sheer fact that he's going to miss the opening couple of games of the year, and that is Andrew Gaff, the West Coast Eagle. Last year took his fantasy game to a whole nother level. He's had seasonal averages of 100 before. In 2015, he averaged 104 in Dream Team and Fantasy, 103 in Supercoach. In 2017, in AFL Fantasy, he had a seasonal average of 100, but last year he took it up at next gear. 110 in Dream Team and Fantasy, and then that 108 in Supercoach. Top 8 midfielder in terms of points scored that we were getting prior to him missing the remainder of the year with suspension. That will carry on, so it won't be till round 3. So he's a pure upgrade target. But man, this guy just finds a way to score, and he took his ceiling up another notch as well last year.
And not only that, he's got a little bit of redemption. I mean, he missed the grand final last year, missed a premiership because of a brain fart.
That's
really,
all it was. 2 seconds where the heat of the moment got the best of him. He's obviously doing and done his time and missed out on the ultimate success as a footballer because of it. But really, from a fantasy perspective, he can go big 120s, 130s, 140s for us. He barely misses a game. In fact, over the past couple of years, prior to suspension, he just missed one game since 2012, and that was back in 2016. So he's durable, he's consistent, he's got a really good ceiling, and you're right, I think he's got a point to prove heading into 2019.
And he's only 26.
Yeah, it's ridiculous.
So, I mean, he's still got 4 or 5, 6 years left of really good gut-running efforts like he does. So, and then he also proved that he could handle the tag this year. So he's ticked all the boxes. Again, the only reason why he probably isn't top 10 in the relevant is suspension of those first 2 games.
He's missing a couple of games and that's it, but he will be a guy that you can bring in very, very early on into your sides. That round 13 buy maybe starts to become a factor when it comes to upgrading. When we get some clarity about how that Collingwood midfield may or may not work, that could be an interesting option. Elliot Yeo, you've got a couple of Brisbane Lion players in the midfield you may be looking at, including a Lockie Neal for Supercoach. Clayton Oliver's through there. So that may start to become a factor, but at least at this point on it, he looks like he could be really unique as an upgrade target.
Yeah, most definitely. And if you're league focused, then he's definitely a guy that you'd be looking at in the next, in the first 4 or 5 games of the season.
Yeah, from round 4, 5, 6, if you got the opportunity, I'd certainly consider bringing him in. Let's talk about another player that was unlucky to miss. Taylor Adams. And the reason he's unlucky to miss is just a couple of years ago when Nathan Buckley allowed him to be the ball-winning midfielder that we know he can be, which was back in 2017. He averaged 114 in Dream Team and Fantasy and 107 in Supercoach. Last year, a little bit of readjustment to his role in varying times, but towards the back end of the year, he started to find his role. From round 18 through to the end of the year, his lowest score in AFL Dream Team and Fantasy was a 93. He had just the 3 scores under 100, while in Supercoach, his lowest score from round 17 right through, including the grand final, was a 90. In the semi-final against GWS, he only had 2 games that he didn't ton up. So he flew home. But there's one big question mark I've got about him, because I love Taylor Adams as a footballer. In and under, not going to hurt you with disposal efficiency. With the guys around him, he's never going to get tagged. The giant question mark I have is, Beams comes into that side, and while I think Taylor should still be in the midfield, Bucks has shown continually now over his career that he's prepared to use Taylor Adams as that filler gap player in their side.
I think if Buckley came out and said Taylor Adams is going to play pure midfield, he'd be in everyone's team.
Absolutely.
But instead, he doesn't say that.
No.
So, I mean, there's talk about who fits where, when. You know, you've got kids coming through like DeGoey, Sear, you've got Stevenson.
Yep.
You know, they're all running through the midfields. Are they going to tag with Levi Greenwood? We saw that happen last year in the finals. You know,
Yeah.
Greenwood went to Dusty. So, I mean, all of these options. You've got Daniel Wells to come back. You've got
Jamie Elliott, who's, you know, a different player, but again, another player to squeeze in.
Well, Jamie Elliott frees up DeGoey to go into the midfield as well. So, I mean, it's just all of these question marks. And I just don't think he's... Like, you want to have a look at it first, don't you?
Yeah, that's the thing is, even if he gets that role, I'd still have some concern about it, because as we saw last year with that Collingwood structure, those opening couple of games, and really was that game against the Crows at Adelaide Oval that everything clicked for their side and their structure and their plans. But Bucks has shown more than countless times he's prepared to sacrifice even very good players to put them in different roles to get that structure and set up just right.
Well, I think that's the thing, isn't it, really? Like, when we look at guys around the same price range, okay, so I'm looking at a Dusty Martin, okay, in Dream Team and AFL Fantasy. At least we know that he spent countless minutes forward off the ball. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, new rule changes, less congestion, Tom Lynch going into the Richmond team. I could see more upside with him going into the midfield. I can't see there's no transparency there with Collingwood.
No.
Yes, Adams is an absolute midfield bull. Of course he is.
Yeah.
But, I mean, we don't know. We don't know where he's going to play. We don't know what impact Beams has.
Yes.
We don't know if they tag. Like, I mean, I've seen plenty of match simulations so far where he is playing midfield, but as you said, he's been prone to be playing midfield for half a game, and then the next half he just disappears and he's out of the game because the coach gets him to do something else.
Yeah.
So it's just an odd... And I love Taylor Adams. You know that. I mean, I tipped him to be the top scorer a couple of years ago in Dream Team. So I love this kid. But I couldn't pick him. And due to that, I don't think he's relevant because we're looking at all the formats. I don't think he's relevant in Supercoach at all at that price tag.
Yeah, you're right. There's some real interesting things. And you mentioned this interesting idea of match simulation and intra-clubs. Well, of course he's going to be playing midfield because they're using their entire list to play against each other. So anyone that's in that midfield rotation is going to be playing midfield. And so really it is the JLT Community Series. You've got to watch his role. But even then, I just don't trust it. I still don't trust how Collingwood are going to use that midfield time. Beams is coming in to play a lot of midfield time. That's going to impact somebody's role, somebody's fantasy scores, and unfortunately, history says Adams is the one that is more likely to be moved out and about and around as opposed to side bottom, Pendlebury, Treloar. That's
and the other thing. The other thing as well is I reckon that's why Treloar's a little bit lower than what we would have expected.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I just, if these guys have the role, 100%.
Totally.
Happy days. But we just can't guarantee it.
Yeah, we're here in the middle of February recording this. No GLT Community Series, and that's the concern and the talking point for us around Taylor Adams.
Let's just talk about that. We're talking about a match where his role changes.
Yeah. He's
got to play midfield till 23 rounds, especially in Dream Team and Supercoach where it's limited trade.
Yeah. Different in AFL Fantasy.
I think AFL Fantasy is probably worth a punt, but I see better options around the same price tag, but that's just me. It's going to be a personal preference.
Yeah.
Collingwood do have a decent enough buy.
Lots of early Thursday, Friday night games.
Yes, that's not going to help you in AFL Fantasy, but in the role in lockouts of Dream Team and Supercoach, it might help you. But yeah, I can see the reason in AFL Fantasy. But yeah, I just couldn't do it in the other two.
Yeah, no, and that's fair enough too. Let's talk about the next player, and probably one of the biggest surprise omissions for many through the 50 most relevant was last year's number one scoring forward that we've got in 2019. Devon Smith not making the 50. That's probably the big shock and surprise for people, especially coming off the back of a seasonal average of 106.6 in Dream Team and Fantasy, a 97.8 in Supercoach. The fact that he's not in the top 50 for some probably feels like I've missed something, and maybe that's a fair argument, and that's okay. But I've still got two big concerns about Devon Smith. Here's my two big concerns. Number one, how the heck did he get forward status? What does Dylan Shield coming into that side mean for him and his role? And he built up so much of his scoring through the tackle column, like record-breaking levels he was delivering. Can he do that and maintain that intensity level again as the AFL are looking to try to open up the game with some new rules?
I suppose the other question mark as well is, like, if we're doing it across all formats, is how Supercoach relevant is he?
Well, let's talk about that Supercoach format for a second. And I want to throw some names out to you that are there and thereabouts, maybe some more, maybe some less. And I want you to tell me if you believe that Devon Smith they're more likely to go top 10. Maybe we'll do that. Do you believe they're a candidate to genuinely be a top 10 scoring forward? Patrick Dangerfield.
Well, I think he's a lock.
Yeah. Tom Hawkins.
Well, he was in the top few last year.
He's top two last year, yeah.
So, I could see him easily, he didn't have the greatest of seasons either. And he was
especially early on. Yeah, exactly right.
So, he really... His scoring is quite decent in Supercoach. So, yeah, potentially, yes.
All right, let's pick guys that aren't in the top five. Isaac Heaney.
I think Heaney breaks out to the Uber this year.
Another guy that's unlucky not to make the 50 most relevant, Robbie Gray.
Again, he only has to be fit. He had such a poor year last year, and he was he averaged almost the same as Devon.
96.8 he averaged last year.
I think it was 0.2 or 0.3 different.
It's 1.1.
So, yeah.
All right.
So you can see a lot of improvement in Gray and not so much in Devon Smith. So, I could see him outscoring Devon Smith.
All right, let me roll through 10 more names that could potentially make the top 10. Really quickly, David Mundy, Josh Dunkley, Toby McLean, Tim Kelly, Jack Rewalt, Chad Wingard, Travis Boak, and I'll even just throw one in just for lols, someone like Jack Billings. All of these guys, you could build a pretty sizable conversation that they are more relevant in Supercoach, some because they're cheaper, some because they're coming back from down years. You could build a case they all comfortably outscore Devon.
Yeah, but you could also build a case for guys like lower on, if you want to keep going.
Tom
Lynch, Joe Danaher, all of those sort of big forwards that may do a little bit of ruck work through the games. So, I've got reservations about Devon Smith. Not so much in Dream Team, but he's definitely one I want to take on in AFL Fantasy as a starting team.
Yeah, agree.
Mind you, let's be absolutely honest here. I reckon he misses the top 50 just to have a conversation about him afterwards.
That may be the truth.
So I reckon that, he's very unlucky to miss the top 50.
Of course he is.
Okay? He's going to be in a high percentage of teams across the team.
Absolutely.
He could very well do a Billings.
Absolutely. Well, you look at his, again, I think we've both kind of said from a Supercoach perspective, I've got so many concerns, more in terms of I just see other players overtaking him that I don't know if he's top 10, and as such, he kind of drifts out of relevance a little bit, at least, certainly as a starting squad option. In Dream Team and Fantasy, if this was a 50 most relevant for Fantasy and Dream Team, he makes the list comfortably. So that certainly has hurt him. But last year in Dream Team and Fantasy, look, it was round 3 against the Dogs. He got a 72. The next time he's going under 90 was in round 15 against North Melbourne. And that's pretty much it. Like, the guy just delivered 90s week in, week out. And so I couldn't start him. But gosh, in AFL Fantasy and Dream Team, I'd probably want him in my completed side if he can get anywhere near QE of what he did last year.
Yeah, but see, this is the thing. We've got short memories in fantasy football, don't we?
Mm-hmm.
So Devon Smith 3 years ago, if we were to try to decide between 3 years ago, Devon Smith and Toby Green was well ahead of him.
Of course he was.
Rightio. Devon Smith had just as many injury problems. He's partially torn his bicep now. How does that affect his tackling? He was tackling at 10 tackles a game last year.
Mm.
Okay, so, how does that affect it? Does he play more midfield? Does he play more forward? Does he play more half forward? How do the new rules affect a small crumbing type, lead-up type of guy like Devon Smith? Because he's not going to be that seventh midfielder anymore.
No.
Pushing up into the midfield, so around the contest. So how does that affect him? Like, there's a lot of question marks about Devon Smith. But as I was saying, only a couple of years ago, Devon Smith was very, very injury prone, and Toby Green was miles ahead. And look at where we are now. For nearly half the price, you can get Toby Green over Devon Smith.
Yeah, it's an interesting point, isn't it?
So if you've got Toby Green in the top 50, then I could see why Devon Smith might be slightly lower.
Yep, no, exactly right. Exactly right. But again, I think he's a very good pick, just maybe not a starter. Let's talk about the next guy who's unlucky to miss, because all of these guys are unlucky. Toby McLean. He flew home late in 2016, in 2017 rather, should I say. Started 2018 on fire. Did have a little bit of a shoulder moment midway through a game that kind of didn't really mean he missed any more games, but probably started to be a bit more outside than inside as a midfielder, as we'd seen. But look, a seasonal average of 94 across all of the formats, didn't miss a game. You could build a case that if he's fit and firing, he adds some great X factor into that Bulldogs midfield.
Oh, most definitely. And especially in Supercoach. He had a run last year, between round 6 and round 10, where I think he was averaging about 130.
Yeah.
So, again, I can see the question marks though, mate. Like, Liberatore coming back, does that mean Toby McLean plays as much inside? Dowhouse leaving, does that mean Toby McLean needs to be a little bit more forward? I could definitely see the question marks. Can he reproduce those numbers based on, the way that he plays the game? So, yeah, I could definitely see why he misses, but, geez, he's unlucky to miss.
He is unlucky to miss, because you're right, there's huge hundreds, especially in the front half of the year, and even towards the back half of the year, there's some big numbers, but there's question marks about just how Luke Beveridge chooses to play his Bulldogs. Does Josh Dunkley retain in that midfield space? Does he not? Tom Liberatore, another player from the 50 most relevant, the impact he has on the inside, and then a young kid that they're really excited about in a Bailey Smith coming into that midfield unit as well. Someone's got to get squeezed some of their inside time. Someone's got to replace Dalhouse's forward pressure, and that's where Toby McLean started his career. I still think he's a good pick. I've just got concerns.
Yep, and I could see why.
Let's talk to the next player. Todd Goldstein. He flew home last year. And again, fantastic, Supercoach especially, player. Very, very handy a couple of years back in Dream Team and Fantasy back in 2015, that monster year where he went 113 in Dream Team and Fantasy, 128 in Supercoach. But last year, after a little bit of a slowish sort of start, especially in Supercoaches where he is really relevant, outside of maybe, I think it was against Brisbane in round 20, from round 9 onwards, he pretty much turned up every single week in Supercoach, and he's certainly firing along, still a very, very good option, but the concern is, I'm seeing a lot of people go for him at the moment, But they're using Proust isn't their logic, but the fact is, Proust didn't play last year.
Yeah, which is odd, isn't it? Because they also picked up Tom Campbell in the pre-season. So I'm a little bit confused about it as well, because he's not getting any younger. He's 30 already before the season starts. He had a massive couple of years, which was great. But he hasn't been able to reproduce his best year. And the best year after, he's a good, it's a 15, 20 points less in Supercoach. So I'm actually a little bit confused. I don't see that the new ruck rules are going to help him, because he is getting a little bit older. He's not. A couple of years ago, he was seen as a very mobile ruckman when in his prime of 27, 28, 26, 27. He's not as mobile these days. I think he struggles to keep up with the Gordons and the Grundys and stuff, the younger kids coming through.
Yeah.
So, I'm a little bit baffled why he's as liked as he is. I could see people taking that option, because there really isn't much after Gawn and Grundy, is there, in the rucks?
No.
So, but me personally would like someone like a Nankervis probably over a Goldstein. But, again, personal preference. But I could see why he definitely misses the top 50.
Yeah, and again, his relevance probably for me really is Supercoach, if anywhere. And like I said, 12 of his last 14 games last year were over the ton barrier, which is certainly fantastic. But again, it was something that was highlighted as we spoke about Max Gawn on his podcast and article at coachespanel.tv, and also just the other day with Brodie Grundy, is while they may not maintain those massive Supercoach numbers, especially talking Supercoach here of, high 120s, 130 for Grundy, I still see, even if they come back to the pack a little bit, and I think the ruck rules help both of them more than they do Goldie, I still see at least a 5, 10, 12-point gap between what they may bottom out to do and the peak of what Goldie could become.
And then on top of that, potentially, I'm just saying, he's got Fremantle or Brisbane in the first two games. So, there's every chance if Sandilands is fit, which I know he's struggling with the calf at the moment, but it's going to be either Sandilands or Sean Darcy, a very physical type of ruckman. And then the next one's Stephen Martin, who, I think Goldstein's always notoriously struggled against Brisbane. So I could see why you don't have him. But, I'm not particularly a big fan of this guy anyway. But, I could see why you don't have him in the top 50. But, again, I could see why people are probably looking at him. It's just, I don't know. To me, I just think Goldstein is so far behind Gawn and Grundy. I just don't see the point of not spending that extra money to get to the top two.
A slight detour before we talk about our next player that's unlucky to miss the 50. If for you, is it more so in the limited trade formats of Supercoach and Dream Team? For you, is it very much you're either going set and forget ruck, or you're going for a really low, cheap R2, a la someone like a Billy Longer, who we spoke about at the start of the 50 most relevant, and then pairing it with one of the Grundys or Gawns, as opposed to getting these quasi kind of value, kind of premium, not quite there, could give me something. Is that how you see the game needs to be played in Dream Team and Supercoach?
Yeah, it's one or the other.
Yeah.
You just look at Supercoach last year, okay, there's 500 points between second and third. And they both played the same amount of games.
Yeah.
That's for the whole season. That's just too much difference. So if you started last year with a Stephen Martin and one of Gawn or Grundy, 120s, high 120 averages, those two, 500 points, MJ.
It's huge. That's season over.
That, let's again, we've got short memories. This time last year, people were saying Cox affected Grundy's numbers, and he came out and averaged 127. If you're going to spend the money, just spend the money and get gone.
Yeah, no, I think so too. Let's talk about the next player. Really well hyped last year. Not much about him this year. And maybe the fantasy community got it about 12 months early. Christian Petrarca. 21 games coming off the back of 22 in 2017. A bump of 9 points per game in AFL Fantasy and Dream Team up to 80.6. Just a handful, 3 or 4 points in Supercoach up to an 81.6. I'm seeing this kid build every single year. Not just his tank, not just his aerobic capacity, which is getting better, but when he's inside 50 or given those limited moments around the ball, gosh, he is just one of the most dominant players that anyone around his size can't compete against.
So I think the main reason why you can't start him at the moment is because of that knee surgery injury over the pre-season.
Yeah.
So, again, I know people have been banging on about Clayton Oliver with the shoulders, but let's be honest, like that was a planned surgery
Correct.
that doesn't affect his fitness over the pre-season.
And that was the only concern people had on him.
He's got the kilometres in his legs, and he was tackling and playing contested ball last year with 2 bung shoulders. So surely that's more relevant, saying, well, if he averaged 109 across the formats last year or better, then he's got every opportunity to average more this year. So, but with Christian Petrarca, it's slightly different because it is a knee-related injury, which means you've got to build the muscles up a little bit before you do that running load.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it does affect your pre-season, you know, where especially with a guy with a tank issues previously who's continually trying to build it. We really want to see this kid have an uninterrupted pre-season, you know, and get those running loads into him. But unfortunately, this one hasn't. Is he going to be relevant later on, though? Great question.
Upgrade.
Can you predict that at his price tags? Why would you be choosing Petrarca over Wingard or Billings at this stage?
Well, and without the question marks on maybe Wingard's got the similar injury question mark right at this very moment in time. But
well, he's got a hammy, doesn't he? So,
he does.
Like, I mean, he might miss the start of the year, but let's be honest. Like on the bubble, he becomes very relevant.
Absolutely,
especially both Billings and Wingard have been talked up about more midfield time and everything else. Yeah, I just don't quite know the reasons why you go Petrarca after the pre-season injuries over those other couple that have featured in the top 50.
Yeah. Question, he's not the same sort of player, but the same sort of contrast in fantasy score build. Is he similar to like Patrick Dangerfield in the fact that for years he was talked about Danger when he was that mid-forward like Petrarca where it was, we know a breakout's coming from a fantasy perspective, we're just not sure exactly when. Do you feel like that's very similar with Petrarca, that it's only a matter of time that he goes absolutely monstrous rather than I'm not sure he will?
Actually, I think Petrarca, is a totally individual type, unique type player. So his goal sense is uncanny, rightio. So it's right up there with the best going around. But does he have the capability of playing on ball and just being a magnet, you know? And that's where I don't think he's the same as Dangerfield.
No, it was more in terms of how Dangerfield, it is early on in his career, we knew he was going to break out as a fantasy player, but didn't quite get there, and then one year it all just kind of clicked for him. Do you think that will happen, or because of just the game style, the players around him, his importance to that forward 50 of Melbourne, we will never see that jump from 80 to a 110 seasonal average?
Well, I don't think Petrarca's ever going to be mid-only.
Yeah.
So the thing with Dangerfield was he became mid-only, like he became a pure mid, and he got his running ability, won the ball, but he could always win the ball. He was finding the ball from the day dot. Petrarca showed it in junior football, but that was because he was bigger than everyone else.
Yeah.
You know, now that he's in the senior football, he's still got that uncanny goal sense. So he's still going to be required to kick the 30, 40 goals a year if Melbourne's going to compete, you know, for premierships and stuff. So I don't think that's going to be the case. He's not going to have the midfield time.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I think that's fair enough too. Let's talk about the last two players that were unlucky. And again, we could probably throw another 30 names in here, but two players that really are unlucky and very popular in their ownership. Both are cash cows. One of them, the number one draft pick last year, Sam Walsh. Cade Simpson has seen some talent roll through that football club in his time. Chris Judd certainly leads that as a player. Patrick Cripps, one of their captains, rolling through there. For Cade Simpson to come out and say this kid's almost one of the most complete footballers he's seen, it is a huge rap. he's a really impressive kid, is Sam Walsh, and pretty unlucky not to make the 50 most relevant, to be honest.
Well, yeah, look, I mean, I can understand, though. Like, I mean, if you're going to include, let's say, Walsh, do you include Rankin? Do you include Rosie? Like, I mean, how many draftees do you include?
Well, when you go back in and look through the 50 most relevant and the guys that are cash cows, they've got some statistical data for us. We've seen what they've done at the lower levels. Granted, VFL, SANFL, things like that. But it's guys like the Josh Corbetts. It's guys like the Michael Gibbons. And they're also basement price, which bodes well into their favour. Even someone that was revealed just yesterday in a Will Setterfield. It's guys that we've seen them do it against men. And we know what they're capable of. Whereas Sam Walsh, we know he's going to be very, very good. But at this stage, he's probably going to play a little bit more outside, which probably, leans towards his strengths anyway. I still think he's going to be a very good long-term fantasy player. He's the clear number one pick for me in a keeper league. But to add him and is the top 50 most relevant, started to feel like I was squeezing, a little bit of a square into a round hole.
I'm actually really surprised with his ownership numbers. Like, I mean, how many times do we have to make the same mistake? Like, it really, at the end of the day, it's like $100,000 you could save to go to one of these other guys, like a Gibbons or maybe a Meadows if he comes in, or someone like that. Like, sure. I'm just a little bit confused why people keep making the same mistakes and going to these high ones. Like, I mean, look at McCluggage a couple of years ago. People thought he was going to come out and dominate. You had Petrarca, unfortunately,
Whitfield.
doing knee. You had, all of these number one picks previously. They're great players, mate, and they're going to take time. I've got no doubt in the world that Simpson's been 100% correct with what he's saying, but he's probably projecting that in development and everything else, similar to what a Josh Kelly would.
Yeah.
So, I mean, even a couple of years ago, now we're going back quite a few years ago, I remember Caniglio, his draft year, okay, he went number 2. Everyone jumped on board, and the guy that they missed was Toby Green, who absolutely smashed it early.
Yeah, and was considerably cheaper.
A lot cheaper, like another 100,000 in the kitty, I think it was back then as well. So, I mean, I don't know. I'm not saying Walsh isn't going to go well. I'm just saying the reason why he's not in the top 50 for us is obviously it's hard to predict what these draftees are going to do with senior football.
Yeah, and you've got guys that are in their early 20s that are priced 80 to 100,000 cheaper and probably have similar job security in terms of the side they're a part of. So they're all factors in. Still a very good player, and again, like I said, I think he's the clear number one target in a new keeper, maybe not a new keeper league, in an existing keeper league that's heading to the draft. You're just going to pick Sam Walsh, aren't you? Unless there's an absolute shocking drop that someone's thrown back to the pool. Walsh is a pretty clear pick, isn't he?
Well, and the other thing is, like, I mean, you only have to look at his teammate. Well, he is. It's a clear pick. But, I mean, Rosie and Rankin are close. Like, but, I mean, Paddy Dow's, like, we didn't have him in last year's top 50.
Yeah.
And people were talking him up great guns last year. So,
Davies Uniacke.
So, yeah, look, I mean, at the end of the day, these draftees, we just don't know what they're going to do we?
No, we don't. All right, last player to wrap up this podcast episode. Again, one of these players, unlucky to miss the 50 most relevant. Christopher Burgess, picked out of the state leagues, defender forward, basement price for us. Looks like he's going to work his way into that Gold Coast Best 22. I think that forward defensive DPP and the ability to swing in with maybe someone like a Darcy Moore or a Connor Rosie could certainly bode well for you. The question, Mike, I had around him as I was kind of building this initial 50 most relevant, it's become more clear as the preseason's gone on. I just wasn't sure if he was going to force his way straight into that Best 22 of the Gold Coast Suns like I was about Corbett. I still think Burgess is a very, very good chance now at debuting in round 1. But back when we created the list, that was my concern, that they might not have to play him from round 1.
Yep, and that's probably a decent concern. Like Burgess, I never had any issues with him being top, like Best 22. But I can understand what you're saying, like Lynch leaves and stuff. Their forwards are like they're looking for a little bit extra goal scoring, so Corbett comes in. But, I mean, you can't have 5 or 6 of these guys in the top 50.
No.
So you just choose one or two, and then you just go with the rest. So, I mean, who knows? Like, I really don't know. Who knows? Like, which guy comes in, which guy doesn't come in. I noticed Gibbons was in your top, 10, which makes sense because everyone's going to be on him. I don't see any issues with him for round one. You don't pick 26-year-olds not to play round one.
Yeah.
Whereas Burgess is that slightly younger, more of an intercept type halfback type position. He's going to be up against Thompson, King, Leslie and a few others.
McLennan they drafted as well. Yep.
Yeah. So, I mean, I could see why he may have a few question marks around his job security. So, yeah, nothing wrong with that. But, I mean, having said that, he's going to be one of the most picked, isn't he? Because he's going to play round one, and we need that security, especially with Harrison Wigg going down.
Yeah, no, I certainly agree, man. And those are just 10 names that I thought, look, they probably could have been argued to build in, and they probably are unlucky to miss. But then you got to take certain players in and out, and it becomes this interesting thing. And like we said right at the start of this podcast, the 50 most relevant, while yes, is about creating a list and putting some players in order and not just throwing some names into the air, but trying to put a relevance conversation around it. The fact is, it's subjective, and the fact is that at the end of the day, this is all about starting a fantasy football conversation as a fantasy football community, make us all bigger and better, to think differently at times, think outside of the box, and then sometimes not overthink a really obvious decision.
Yep, and it shouldn't impact whatever you do in your teams.
No.
This is just a general conversation. I love these sort of conversations, to be honest.
Yep, no, I'm a massive fan, and that's what I love about being a part of the coaches panel. It's not telling people what they should do or what they shouldn't do. It's about having a conversation, providing all the information that we can to best help resource you with your Supercoach Dream Team, AFL Fantasy, your draft, keeper, seasonal leagues, your daily fantasy, giving you all the information we can so that you can make an informed decision that best fits for you. And that's what we want to do, not just in the preseason, but right throughout every season from a fantasy footy perspective.
So I've got one name, MJ.
Oh, here we go.
I've got to throw you at one.
Yeah.
Okay, so how close was Marcus Bontempelli from being in the top 50?
He would have been in late 60s.
Fair enough. So if it was just Supercoach, would he have featured?
Yep.
So it's just more because of DT and his AFL fantasy history?
Yeah, just because in Dream Team and Fantasy, like he's had one really great stretch, one really strong year, the Bulldogs sort of premiership year, but similar to what we speak about the concerns for, Dunkley and McLean, I feel like they're still going to use him a heck of a lot forward. I thought he was going to pick up forward status from champion data this year. That's how much forward time I thought he spent. And I still think they're going to need to use him there to create those avenues to goal. And because of that, his midfield time and then the likely fantasy football output could be diminished because he's not getting 30 touches a game. They're going to want him to get 20 touches and 2 goals a game, not 35 touches and no goals a game. Supercoach, different story. It's kind of the reverse of Devon Smith, where if it was just an AFL fantasy top 50, he walks in no problem. But because it's not a Supercoach only one, I really struggled to fit Bont in.
So I also assumed that the Geelong mids, the Kellys, the Ablets, the Duncans, the Selwoods.
Same question. Even Ablets.
Too many question marks like the Collingwood guys.
Yeah, same question, and the one positive is it seems like we've got some clarity about Patrick Dangerfield, but even last year, throughout the year, you look at how Kelly's year started, Duncan's year started, Menegola's year started, even Selwoods. You just watch these trends. It's that there's only so many points that a player's going to get each week, and it was really hard to predict last year which one was the right option. Probably it turned out Kelly was because he was the cash cow. But entering into the new year outside of Dangerfield with the forward status, I've got no confidence with which one I could say, yep, no problem at all. They're going to be the guy that's going to boom this year. I still have those concerns.
Yep, 100% agree.
All right, man. Hey, appreciate your thoughts talking about these 10 guys unlucky to miss the 50 most relevant.
No worries, anytime.
If you want to check out the article on this or any of the other 49 players we have revealed thus far, you can go and check that out at coachespanel.tv. And tomorrow morning at the website and also via Spotify and iTunes, we reveal who I've got as the number one most relevant player for 2019. Rids, I'll get you back on for that episode, and it may not be a surprise to you, but there's a real big important reason that I think not only is he the most most relevant player, I think he's the most important selection for you in 2019.